We are going to install insulated plasterboard on these cold solid walls. We've worked out that there's no rising damp and there's no penetrating damp and also no bridging issues either. This could be mistaken for rising damp, and it is not. Now, a keen eye will notice that this is a different plaster to that. So that is an old Browning plaster, which is very moisture absorbent. And this stuff, what looks like dry zone, but is very moisture resistant. So what was really going on here was the warm air in the room was condensing and it was going into the Browning plaster. Once it condenses into the plaster, it can travel up, it can travel this way, but it can't travel past this moisture resistant plaster. So what happens, it was pooling at this point and then it was rerouting laterally. So that could be mistaken for rising damp because it looks like a band, but it wasn't. It was to do with there being two different substrates. We're going to tackle it initially by, we're going to have to take down the picture rail and we're going to have to attack the coving as well. Very unlikely that any of that's going to come down in one piece because as you can see, the profile is tucked up right into the corner. So it's just going to be destroyed. Insulated plasterboard going here and insulated plasterboard going under the bay. The homeowner was absolutely adamant that we put as much in as possible. He said that 6 months of the year they just can't use the room because it's so cold. I have suggested getting a larger radiator, even though it is quite large anyway, and insulating the ceiling. They're really adamant on getting the walls insulated. So that's what we're going to do for the customer. This is the day after knocking off. Giving this a dilute PVA just to seal that dust in and stop the plasterboard adhesive going off too quickly. This is where the coving, the cornicing came down, which is a tragedy, but it's what had to be done. And these larger gaps I'm going to fill with foam and then we're going to put bonding on these. So it's like that and it just stops the foam from going up and up and up and up and up. Gun cleaner. Towel's got a bit of life left in it yet. It's also a good opportunity now, if there's any holes in the brickwork, is to get that foamed in just to stop any cold spots, and that'll just help a little bit. Just while the foam is going off, even though this has had a dilute PVA, I'm just going to go over these slats with a little bit of SBI just to help the bonding in here, just to be absolutely sure that it's not going to dry out too quickly. So we're going to cut back the lining paper just so that when we put the bonding on, we'll meet level with the plaster that's there, and then I'll be able to skim over it and blend in. We can cut that back, and now we've got something to go onto there. I'm going to just go over this with SBR and just the tips of the foam, just, you know, why not? So we're going to get a mix of bonding on. We're going to make it nice and wet so it can squidge up between those laths. Getting a nice tight coat of bonding, you can see where it's going up into the slats. So as I'm pulling across, putting a lot of pressure, and then at the end I'm really flicking that bonding up into that edge and getting it stuck to that edge. Something like this, it's got a tendency, if it hits a gap, if you haven't got enough pressure on and you hit a gap, it's just going to fall out. I'm going to go around like that and then I'll build it up a bit. In the end, we didn't end up putting any skim on this because the coving will cover where that bonding is, so there was no point skimming it. You can see just there that I've brushed it down with water just to thin out those edges. So what I'm doing here is working out how to plumb the insulated plasterboard when it goes on. As you can see here, that's the furthest out part of the wall, and we've followed that plumb line. And obviously in these older houses, the walls are always well out, which it is. So that's how far out the wall is anyway. So we're going to have to get the plasterboard to here. I haven't actually gone into this yet, but this remaining plaster, I'm pretty sure this is dry zone, and it is solid onto the wall. It is bonded, like, it's just unbelievably super bonded onto that wall. If I was to try and chisel that off or power tool that off, I'm really going to be damaging the brick. So we've made the decision to leave that on. So that's staying on. And also it is providing, even though I don't think there was any issue, it is providing a slight bit of damp proofing. We want to save as much space in the alcove as possible, so at the bottom where the dry zone plaster is, that comes off the wall maybe about 20-30mm in places, so we're going to use PU foam and grab adhesive at this point. The reason is we can really squash that into the wall, we can get a really thin profile on the adhesive, whereas at the top of the wall we have to build it out a bit to meet the plumb line, so we're going to use dot and dab. At the very top of the wall it comes out quite a lot, so we might put a dab on, let that dry, and so we've got something to dab onto. If the dab's too thick, it's going to fall down. This is the dot and the dab. We're going to have to bring the wall out as far as that plumb line. Square to the wall, you're just on it there. You're just on it there as well, you see. Square to the wall, plumb. Now because it's so far out, I'll put a bit of dab on to build it up, just so it's got something to go onto. It's only really at the top that the wall comes out so much. So as we go further down, just normal dab is going to be okay. It's just to get it plumb, and also to seal. It helps with, what's the word, indigestion condensation? That's definitely not ingestitional. But anyway, it'll help create a barrier. We're going to foam the sides anyway. And that's it for today. We've remade the ceilings, plumbed up the wall, and now let's pack away. So here we go, a loaded up van. It's heavy stuff, heavy lifting, all of that insulated plasterboard. So to save the customer money, we've used the offcuts from the 8x4 boards, and we're going to fit these underneath the sill. Now, the thickness of the 50mm board is too thick to fit underneath the sill, so we've shaved the back of it off with a saw. Therefore, we can't use dot and dab to bond it to the wall, because the insulated plasterboard is usually paper backed, and that's what the dot and dab can stick to. But because we've shaved that off, to get a perfect fit of insulation underneath that sill, we're going to have to use PU foam or grab adhesive for that exposed foam to stick to. We are making use of every millimetre of heat saving insulation at this moment, and the homeowner is very happy about that. As we're not using dot and dab, we have no real means of plumbing those little sections underneath the bay, and those walls were not plumb, I can assure you. So we've had to go with what the wall is, but we can make that up later when we start skimming. By shaving off the back of the board, you might be thinking this is going to disrupt the vapour barrier, but the vapour barrier is actually on the back of the plasterboard before the PIR foam. So we've got some on the top of the board because there's a difference in thickness there. We're just making sure we've got enough for that to grip to that. At this point, space saving was less of an issue, so we've gone with dot and dab on this wall because we can still achieve a better plumb line than what it was before. And we've gone for a thinner dab lower down the wall, and again built it up at the top where it's needed that thickness.
Oh yeah?
Come. We were cutting the boarding yesterday for the bay window and the insulation, and then today we've got the electrician in because the customer decided they want a few more sockets in, which is fine. I know a guy and he can come in and we can get on it together. It delays progress a little bit in the end, but what the customer wants, the customer gets. So I couldn't get loads of footage at this point because me and Sparks were getting on it. I asked Sparks to do a bit of filming for me. He took it in his stride and he offered some interesting commentary.
Okay, here we go. This is Pollock's plastering using the creamy whipper to its full potential.
I might as well just put the whole bag in.
Yeah, put the whole bag in, get a bag in. Go on, get the full packet in. He's on the packet.
I'm not.
Yeah, normally we put some on floors, what you can mix on, but today we've got the expert mixer.
To be fair, that's a good point.
Commander-in-Chief. Oh yeah. Top mixing. Secret recipe.
Can you smell that?
Yeah, no, I can't actually. What have you done? Have you let one go?
No, it's just this one here.
Yeah.
The Signac one. It was like a bubble gum.
That's from Colombia, that's why, that one. We've got the Universal Peruvian mountain powder. And it's doing a bit of a foaming here. We've got some grab a nail, some bonding, and we're going to stick it on the wall.
So the boards are on the wall. You can see in the image there, at the bottom part of the back of that plasterboard is covered in PU foam and grab adhesive, whilst the top part we've actually put plasterboard adhesive on the plasterboard itself, and the reason for that is to make sure that that dab connects with the dab that's already on the wall to create that seal and to prevent interstitial condensation. Wherever there was a gap or a crack, that has now been foamed in, and that's going to help prevent any moist warm air from working its way through and condensing on the wall behind. At this point I've cut the foam back, I have scrim taped all of the joins, and we've also SBR'd all of the boards and those reveals there at the window just to make sure everything is going off at the same pace. Notice we have a board on the floor now thanks to the sparks of commentary. I have taken note of that. It's heavy once all that water's gone in, and as the homeowner was around today, I think at this point I noticed there was a pram in my path, which is fine, you just move it out the way, no problem. Okay. So now we are going to begin the fun part, which is plastering. The walls went in at the base here, so we had to follow that because we were only using PU foam to bond. We're going to build up that base, that bottom there, with a few layers of skim just to get it into more of a plumb state. Giving these wet angles a fair bit of attention. These are the first things that you see when you walk into the room. Rather than letting anything firm up before it's too late, we're going to get it in the right place, even though it's a bit wet still, but we're going to get it in the right place, and as it firms up we're really going to dial that in. So despite using a plaster retarder, having the walls SBR'd, that plaster was firming up quick. Don't know what it is with multi-finish at the moment, but it is going off. So I'm quickly flattening everything in before getting on to the next coat. It's a quicker process on the second coat. The first coat takes a bit of time because you're filling out lots of hollows and deviations in the walls, and the plaster's on a bit thicker. The moisture in the first coat of plaster helps the second coat of plaster to just roll over it. So this is the last wall of this set, and we're just getting that second coat on before flattening in. Nice one, Phil. Just brushing down the back of that architrave and then troweling from that point. The brush helps to fill out any little gaps, any little holes or misses. Brushing down underneath that sill just to fill in any plaster, get it right up to that sill edge, and I'm using two hands to apply pressure all the way along the length of the trowel. I think I'd made a nick in the wall at that point, which is annoying, so that's me trying to cover it up at that little spot. Can you see it? Yeah. So this process is sort of repeated all the way around the bay, just a kind of continual, gradual flattening in, taking out the lines, getting rid of any imperfections, getting those snots off the corner of that wall. I'm using a brush again to brush down the corners to get it all nice and neat before we move on to the wet trowel. You can see now it's beginning to take shape. The walls are looking smooth. That was the moment I created a little nick in the wall, so I had to use some old plaster from the bin that's still tough but malleable to repair that with. Bosh! So you can see now we've got the walls on either side of the chimney breast. I think that's the first coat, but essentially we go through the same process. I'm going to skip past that bit because I've more or less gone over it. That means it's 5 o'clock.
Oh really?
That means we left 2 hours ago.
I thought it was Chico time.
So I'm giving everything a final polish now, and essentially that is the end of the video. We've got the plasterboard on, we've kept as much space as we can in the alcoves, we've packed out the insulation underneath the bay, and we've given it all a lovely coat of plaster that's going to be ready for a lick of paint. And this is going to keep the house nice and warm, and they'll be able to use the room for an extra 6 months of the year, whereas they couldn't before. Now that, if you ask me, is value.